What if you woke up tomorrow in a world ruled by beings 3 times your size? Imagine stepping outside your door only to find footprints the size of swimming pools carved into the earth. Picture looking up at towering figures whose shadows eclipse the sun, whose voices shake the ground like thunder, and whose mere presence fills you with primordial terror. This isn't science fiction. This is history. According to ancient texts from across the world, there was once an age when giants walked the earth. The Nephilim of Hebrew scripture, the Titans of Greek mythology, the Fomorians of Celtic lore. But these weren't gentle giants from fairy tales. They were predators. And you would have been prey. So why wouldn't you survive the age of giants? We'll find out together in this new episode of Secret Origins. Welcome. Imagine you wake up in the age of giants. Your eyes open, but something feels wrong. The ground beneath you trembles rhythmically, like a massive heartbeat. You sit up, confused, only to realize these aren't heartbeats, they're footsteps. You stumble to what you think is your window, but as you look outside, terror grips you. The landscape has changed. Every tree looks like a twig. Every hill seems flattened. And in the distance, moving slowly but deliberately toward your settlement, are shadows that stretch across the horizon like moving mountains. The Hebrew Bible calls them Nephilim. Genesis 6:4 describes them clearly. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went in to the daughters of humans, who bore children to them. These were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown. But as you watch these titanic figures approach, one thing becomes crystal clear. These weren't heroes. They were your executioners. According to the Book of Enoch, an ancient text that predates the Bible, these giants weren't just large humans. They were abominations. Hybrid creatures born from the union of fallen angels and human women. The text describes them as being 3,000 ells in height. That's over 9,000 feet tall. Now, as one of these creatures draws near your settlement, you realize what those measurements actually mean. You crane your neck upward, but you can't even see where this being ends. Its foot, now visible in the distance, is larger than your entire village. When it takes a single step, the ground shakes so violently that you're thrown to your knees. You try to run, but where? In a world built by and for giants, there is nowhere a creature your size can hide. These giants weren't content to coexist with humanity. According to ancient sources, they were insatiable consumers. The Book of Enoch states that they consumed all the acquisitions of men. When that wasn't enough, they began eating humans themselves. As you crouch behind what used to be your home's wall, now reduced to rubble by the giant's approach, you watch in horror as massive fingers, each thicker than tree trunks, begin plucking people from the ruins. Your neighbors, your friends, your family, lifted effortlessly and examined like insects before disappearing into a mouth so vast you could walk into it standing upright. This is your new reality. You are not just small, you are food. Let's say you somehow survived that first encounter. Maybe the giant was distracted by easier prey. Maybe you found a crack in the earth deep enough to hide in. Now you face an even more terrifying prospect. How do you live day to day in a world that wasn't built for you? You need food, but the crops that once fed your village are now trampled into the earth by footsteps larger than houses. The few grains that remain are scattered across miles of devastated landscape, and gathering them would mean exposing yourself in the open for hours when another giant might appear on the horizon. You need shelter, but look around. Every structure in this world is built to accommodate beings whose scale you can barely comprehend. The doorways tower above you like cathedral entrances, if you could even reach them. The stairs are carved from single blocks of stone, each step taller than you are. Across the globe, we find massive stone structures that mainstream archaeology struggles to explain. The trilithons at Stonehenge, the foundation stones at Baalbek, some weighing over 800 tons, the precision-cut blocks at Puma Punku in Bolivia, fitted together so perfectly that you can't slide a knife blade between them. Modern engineers admit they couldn't build these structures today, even with our advanced machinery. But now you understand why they exist. They were built by and for beings who could handle 800-ton stones, like you handle coffee cups. You need water, but the wells and fountains of this giant world are so deep and wide that approaching them is like standing at the edge of a cliff. The containers used to draw water are larger than bathtubs and weigh more than cars. Even if you could reach the water, how would you lift a bucket designed for hands the size of your entire body? In Lebanon, the ancient site of Baalbek contains the largest worked stone blocks in the world. The Temple of Jupiter sits on a foundation of stones, each weighing 800 tons. But even more mysterious are the unfinished stones in the nearby quarry. Blocks weighing up to 1,200 tons, cut with precision that defies explanation. As you wander through these giant-built cities, every tool you encounter is impossibly large. Hammers that weigh as much as cars, cups that could serve as swimming pools, weapons that you couldn't even budge, let alone wield. You're not just small in this world, you're utterly helpless. And that's when you realize the horrifying truth. You weren't meant to survive here. You were meant to serve, or be consumed. But let's say you've managed to find food, water, and some form of shelter in the crevices of this giant world. Now comes the truly terrifying part, dealing with the rulers themselves. The Book of Jubilees, another ancient text, states that injustice increased on the earth and all flesh corrupted its way during the time of the giants. They weren't just physically superior, they were morally bankrupt. And you, tiny and defenseless, would be completely at their mercy. Picture your typical morning routine in this nightmare world. You wake up, if you manage to sleep through the constant rumbling of giant footsteps, and immediately check the horizon for massive silhouettes. But then you hear it, a sound like thunder, but rhythmic. Laughter, giant laughter, echoing across the landscape like the voice of a god. And it's getting closer. According to the scriptures, these beings filled the earth with violence. The Hebrew word used to describe their behavior, Hamas, means violence in its most extreme form. Not just killing, but cruelty, oppression, and the complete absence of justice. As the laughter grows louder, you realize with horror what's happening. They're playing a game, and you're the game piece. You run, but your tiny legs can only carry you so far. The ground shakes with each massive footstep behind you, each one covering more distance than you could run in minutes. You dive behind a boulder just as a shadow falls over you, a shadow cast by a being so tall you can't see its head. A voice booms above you, speaking in a language that sounds like landslides and thunder. You don't understand the words, but the tone is clear. Amusement. To this creature, your desperate flight is entertainment. A massive hand reaches down, a hand larger than your entire hiding place. Fingers thicker than tree trunks probe the area around your rock, toying with you, letting you think you might escape before cutting off your route. This isn't hunting, this is play, and you're the toy. This is what daily life would be like under giant rule. Not a struggle for survival, but a prolonged form of entertainment for beings who see you as nothing more than an amusing pest. The ancient texts suggest that these giants weren't just randomly violent, they were systematically evil. They taught humans forbidden knowledge, the arts of war, the making of weapons, the secrets of sorcery and seduction. But they did this not to help humanity advance, but to corrupt and ultimately destroy them. Let's say you encounter a friendly giant, one who doesn't immediately try to crush or eat you. Instead, it kneels down to your level, which still puts its face high above you like a building, and begins to teach you things. But the knowledge it shares is poisonous. How to make weapons that will turn humans against each other, how to manipulate others through dark arts, how to summon powers that will corrupt your very soul. You realize that even the kind giants aren't trying to help you, they're trying to damn you. Their very presence corrupts everything they touch, turning survival itself into a form of spiritual poison. You wouldn't just be living under giant overlords, you'd be living in a world poisoned by their influence, where every day of survival comes at the cost of your humanity. But perhaps most terrifying of all would be the technology these giants possessed. Ancient texts hint at capabilities that sound almost like science fiction. The ability to manipulate weather, to move massive stones through the air, to create hybrid creatures, and to access knowledge from beyond the physical world. Now imagine being on the receiving end of such power. You're hiding in what you think is a safe cave when suddenly the weather outside changes. Not gradually, like a natural storm, but instantly. The sky turns black, lightning begins striking in precise patterns, and you realize with horror that this isn't natural. It's being controlled. The Book of Enoch describes the Watchers teaching humans about the cutting of roots and the power of enchantment. Other texts speak of giants who could control the elements, who built flying vessels, and who possessed weapons of unimaginable power. You peer outside your cave and see massive stone blocks floating through the air like leaves in the wind, rearranging themselves into new structures at the giant's whim. The very physics of your world are being rewritten by beings whose technology you can't even begin to understand. Archaeological evidence supports some of these claims. In Peru, the Sacsayhuaman fortress contains stones so perfectly fitted that they've survived countless earthquakes without mortar. The precision of the cuts suggests technology far beyond anything ancient humans should have possessed. Local legends attribute the construction to giants who could make stones walk. But imagine witnessing such construction as a tiny human observer. You watch as stones larger than buildings move through the air without any visible means of support, fitting together with impossible precision. You realize that in this world, the very elements are your enemies. Similar stories emerge from every continent. In Japan, legends speak of Oni, giant demons who could move mountains. In Scotland, myths describe the Fomorians who built stone circles with supernatural power. In North America, native tribes tell of a race of cannibalistic giants who possessed great magic. As you cower in whatever shelter you can find, these aren't myths anymore. They're your daily reality. Now imagine being tracked by beings who possess such abilities. They don't need to see you to find you. They can sense your presence from miles away. They don't need to chase you. They can simply will the ground beneath your feet to shift, dropping you into their waiting hands. They don't need weapons to kill you. They can stop your heart with a thought. The very elements would be turned against you. The earth itself would be your enemy. In such a world, survival isn't about cleverness or strength. It's about the momentary mercy of beings who could end your existence without even noticing they'd done it. And according to the ancient texts, mercy was not something these creatures possessed in abundance. As terrifying as it sounds, some humans did try to resist. Ancient texts speak of wars between humans and giants, of brave warriors who stood against impossible odds, of heroes who dared to challenge the tyrannical order. But imagine being asked to join such a rebellion. You're handed a sword, if you can even lift it, and told to march against creatures whose smallest finger is thicker than your entire body. The very notion would be laughable if it weren't so terrifyingly real. The Bible mentions several of these giant killers: David against Goliath, Joshua against the Anakim, Caleb against the sons of Anak. But read these stories carefully, and you'll notice something unsettling. These weren't fair fights. They were miraculous victories against impossible odds, won only through divine intervention. The most famous of these encounters is David's battle with Goliath, but most people miss the crucial details. Goliath wasn't just tall. He was a trained warrior from a race of giants, armed with weapons that no normal human could even lift. His spearhead alone weighed 15 pounds. Now imagine you're in David's position, but without his divine calling. You stand before Goliath, and your perspective is that of an ant looking up at a mountain. David's victory wasn't due to superior skill or strength. It was a miracle, but you don't have that divine guidance. This is what resistance looked like in the Age of Giants, a series of miraculous victories punctuating an otherwise hopeless struggle for survival. And miracles, by definition, were rare. According to the ancient texts, this age of giant tyranny couldn't last forever. The corruption had become so complete, the violence so overwhelming, that divine intervention became necessary. The solution was radical: a complete reset of the world through a global flood. But imagine experiencing this salvation from your perspective as a tiny survivor. You wake up one morning to the sound of water, not the gentle patter of rain, but the roar of oceans falling from the sky. Genesis 6:13 states, "So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them." As the waters rise around you, you realize this flood isn't just about cleansing humanity's sin. It's about exterminating the giants who had made your life a living nightmare. For the first time in your life, you see them afraid. And there's a terrible beauty in watching creatures who once treated you like insects now thrashing helplessly in the divine deluge. But you also realize that this salvation might kill you too. But here's the terrifying part. The flood didn't eliminate all of them. Numbers 13:33 states, "We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." This was written after the flood. The giants had returned. So imagine your horror when, generations later, you see those familiar shadows on the horizon again. The nightmare you thought was over has returned, and this time they're angry. What this means is that the Age of Giants wasn't just a prehistoric nightmare. It continued throughout human history. Every time your people began to flourish, the giants would return to remind you of your place in the world. So let's return to our original question. Why wouldn't you survive the Age of Giants? The answer isn't just about their size or strength, though those would certainly be insurmountable obstacles. It's about the complete psychological breakdown that living in such terror would inevitably cause. Think about how you react when you encounter something genuinely threatening in today's world: a dangerous animal, a violent criminal, a natural disaster. Your heart races, your hands shake, adrenaline floods your system. Now imagine living with that level of terror every moment of every day. In a world ruled by giants, you would never sleep soundly. Every sound in the night could be a footstep. Every shadow could be a massive hand reaching down to pluck you from your hiding place. Your nervous system, designed to handle occasional bursts of fear, would be constantly flooded with stress hormones. Within weeks, you'd be suffering from what we now recognize as severe PTSD, but there would be no recovery because the trauma never ends. You'd watch fellow survivors break down one by one. Some would become catatonic, simply sitting in corners and rocking back and forth. But perhaps worse than the constant fear would be the absolute helplessness. Humans are problem solvers by nature. We face challenges and find ways to overcome them. But in the age of giants, there are no solutions, only temporary delays of the inevitable. You can't fight beings whose fingernails are harder than your strongest weapons. You can't hide from creatures who can reshape the landscape at will. You can't negotiate with beings who see you as insects. Every survival instinct you possess would be not just useless, but counterproductive. The fight response? Suicide. The flight response? A brief postponement of death. The freeze response? You become an easy target. You would be trapped in a world where every natural response to danger only makes your situation worse. The psychological damage from this kind of absolute powerlessness would destroy your mind long before the giants destroyed your body. As your mind gradually fragments under the constant stress, you begin to notice changes in yourself and the other survivors. The constant malnutrition has left you weakened and skeletal. Your hair has turned grey from stress even if you're young. Your hands shake constantly and you jump at the slightest sound. You've developed what we might call giant paranoia, the inability to enjoy even a moment of peace because you're constantly scanning the horizon for massive silhouettes. You can't look at a distant cloud without wondering if it might be a giant's head. The few other survivors you encounter are in similar states. Conversations consist mainly of whispered warnings about giant sightings and increasingly desperate plans for finding food or shelter. No one talks about the future anymore because everyone understands there isn't one. You've all accepted that you're living on borrowed time, that your continued existence is nothing more than an oversight that will eventually be corrected, and perhaps most terrifyingly of all, part of you begins to hope for that final encounter. Death starts to look like mercy compared to indefinite survival in this nightmare world. So why wouldn't you survive the age of giants? Because survival in such a world requires something no human possesses: the ability to exist indefinitely as prey without losing your sanity, your humanity, or your will to live. Modern humanity has grown comfortable with the illusion of dominance. We've forgotten the terror our ancestors knew, the constant awareness that there are things in this world far more powerful than ourselves. We've forgotten what it means to truly fear. But in the age of giants, you would remember. Every day would be a lesson in humility, in insignificance, in the true pecking order of creation. And eventually, that lesson would break you. Whether you died from starvation, disease, accident, or simply being noticed by one of your giant overlords, your death would be meaningless in the grand scheme of things. You would be forgotten instantly, your brief existence no more significant to the giants than the death of an ant is to you. The question isn't whether you would survive the age of giants. The question is whether that age ever really ended at all. And if it hasn't, whether you're prepared for what's coming next. Because according to the ancient prophecies, the giants are destined to return to open rule over the earth. And when they do, modern humans, soft, weak, and completely unprepared for such a reality, will fare even worse than their ancient ancestors. The ancients tried to warn us. They left their messages carved in stone, written in texts, embedded in the very landscape of our world. They told us about the giants who once ruled the earth, who filled it with violence, who saw humanity as nothing more than insects to be crushed or consumed. But we've chosen to see their warnings as myths, their testimonies as legends, their fears as primitive superstitions. Perhaps that's exactly what the giants have been waiting for us to do. Because in the age of giants, ignorance isn't bliss, it's extinction. What do you think? Are we living in the shadow of ancient giants, or are we heading toward their return? Let us know in the comments. Give this video a like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you're ready to uncover how the Nephilim may have escaped the flood and still walk among us today, watch our next video appearing on your screen right now. Keep your minds open. And until we meet again,